Hey there, this July the stars aligned and I was able to play more BattleTech than I'd ever played before in the span of 1 month. I got in a total of 13 games of BattleTech or Alpha Strike on the tabletop. And at some point I started thinking, is there something I can learn from every single game I'm playing? Because, at this point I've played BattleTech for a couple of years and I've moved on from, just learning the game. Now I'm playing the game. But this is my hobby and I want to get better at it all the time. And I started to consciously think about what am I learning about BattleTech in every single game I'm playing. So here are lessons from every single game of BattleTech and Alpha Strike I played in July this year. Some of them are big lessons and some of them are smaller things or like misconceptions I had before playing these games. Let's get into it. So my first Alpha Strike game of July and my first BattleTech game of July are sort of linked because I put something on the table in both games for the first time ever, and that is ProtoMechs. I've been very excited about ProtoMechs lately because I think they play unlike anything else in all of BattleTech. Nothing plays like ProtoMechs. If you don't know, put simply, ProtoMechs are deployed in points of 5 ProtoMechs. They are all individually based, but you activate all of them at the same time. So if you activate your point of ProtoMechs, you have to move 5 individual units. And that makes them work in a pretty unique sort of way. Now, in both of these games, I had a point of Orc Force. The Orc is a clan Hell's Horses ProtoMech, and it's pretty fast. It's not the fastest thing on the battlefield. It moves 6'9", and in Alpha Strike like 12 inches, I think. So it's not the fastest thing on the battlefield, and it's pretty lightly armored. You can destroy them with a couple of medium lasers, and it doesn't have the best weaponry. It has like a couple of machine guns and an SRM-3 with way too little ammo, but I found them to be pretty fantastic in BattleTech and Alpha Strike. Probably more useful in Alpha Strike, honestly. And this is also reflected in their point value, but they are fantastic harassers. They are incredible at this task. You get 5 of them, and they are weak enough and fast enough that the enemy really has to consider the point of trying to target them, really, because you can destroy ProtoMech in a turn very easily, but you're not firing at more immediately threatening enemy units like mechs or combat vehicles. So this enables ProtoMechs, these orcs, to swarm up the enemy or flank them, get behind them, or just swarm the objective. They are fantastic at taking objectives because you can flood the objective with 2 or 3 orcs, and your enemy has to work really hard on concentrating fire on these tiny little guys to clear the objective. So the lesson I learned from my first 2 games is ProtoMechs are fantastic, and I'm very excited to get more and different ProtoMechs. I only have the orcs thus far. My second BattleTech game was quite an exciting one because I got to field my Kurita force for the first time. This was a game played using the instant action rules. This is sort of a fan supplement I've mentioned before on this channel. It's a very fun way to pick out a mission because you pick out an agenda instead of just rolling the die. You pick out my force, my lance is like a recon lance, so I'm gonna pick like a recon agenda, and then your opponent also chooses an agenda, and then those 2 agendas together sort of combine to make a mission. And we ended up playing like this pursuit mission, where I had to cross the battlefield while my opponent had to stop me from doing so. And what was new for me about this game were the hidden unit rules, because I'd never played using those, or I think I did once in Germany in like a campaign game that I joined halfway through or something, but that's my only brush with the rules. But this time we had to figure out how the hidden unit rules work, and turns out they are very simple and very flavorful. It's quite simple. The player with the hidden units just sort of marks down which hex their units are in, and at different points in the turn you can reveal your unit and they can move or fire. And if you stumble directly into the hex the hidden unit is in, they can like do a point blank shot with everything they got, and it's pretty cool. I really do want to play more games with hidden units from now on. I'm not sure why I thought the hidden units rules were going to be sort of more complex. They're not really complex or difficult to play. It's really pretty simple, and you can play a variety of different missions using these hidden unit rules. Definitely recommend giving hidden unit rules a go. Also, this person made a fantastic battle report out of our game, and I highly recommend you give that one a read. It's linked in the description below, or here as a link here, somewhere floating around. I also played a very quick 4-mechs versus 4-mechs sort of demo game of Alpha Strike with the same person, because they'd never played Alpha Strike, and I wanted to show them what it's all about. And, I didn't really learn too much about playing Alpha Strike through this game, but I did learn something, and that's, I don't think the Steiner Coliseum is the best map for that sort of game. Probably use a different map with elevation and woods and stuff. We just picked a map at random and we got the Coliseum, and maybe that's not the best map for that sort of game. So maybe only use that map for like Solaris fights or something. My third game of BattleTech was at Ropecon, which is like the biggest sort of role-playing, board gaming, miniature gaming, all sorts of nerd stuff convention in Finland. It takes place every year in, late July or so. And I went there with a cousin of mine, and we wanted to play a game on the first evening, and we got to play it on a hex map with 3D hills and terrain. And I'd played on a hex map using like 3D hills before, but that was a long time ago, and it was back when I wasn't that experienced with BattleTech. So I got to look at how 3D terrain actually works in a game of BattleTech. And what I think is 3D terrain does make for a more immersive sort of gaming experience. Of course, you sort of get more of a feel for the game because you can see how everything works, and line of sight stuff is clearer, I would say. But there was one problem that I encountered while using specifically hex hills, and it's the fact that sometimes it gets actually sort of more difficult to determine exact lines on the map, because the hills are covering up the actual hex map lines. So, for example, in situations where you got like the straight line to a different hex, it might not be quite as clear as just on a hex map. There are pros and cons to playing on 3D terrain, and that's really my one problem with 3D terrain, but I'd be happy to play more with 3D terrain. On the second day of Ropecon, I got to play a classic old 2 versus 2, 2 lances versus 2 lances game on the deserts map pack maps, which I'd never actually done before. And, it was a great game. Also was a perfect demonstration of why you want to play actual missions. This was again one of those sorts of missions where our opponents wanted to breach through our line of defense, and we wanted to stop them. And it ended in a very narrow draw, and everyone lost, everyone had fun. But the thing I learned was I definitely need to get the deserts map pack. I think I don't see that map pack played that much in the wild, but they look great, of course, and they bring a bit of a different feel to the battlefield than the grasslands maps. And also, of course, they play differently because they have less woods and forests and water, but they have more hills maybe. And of course, like the airfield thing that they have is a pretty cool sort of set piece or setting for a battle in BattleTech. So I definitely do need to get the deserts map pack. The next game of BattleTech I got to play was my 5th BattleTech game, and it was actually a demo for another cousin of mine who also came to Ropecon to try out BattleTech for the first time. And it was a fun game. It was, again, 2 versus 2, but this time we had 2 mechs per player. And, I violated my own sorts of ideals about demo games because I let my cousin just pick out 2 mechs he wanted to pick. And he picked 2 heavy mechs. He picked a catapult and a crusader. And, it was a fun game. But something that my cousin also noticed was that, the mechs just take so many hits and they have so many weapons that it got more confusing for him, more complex than it really needed to be. So what I learned from this game was really that I should actually heed my own advice in that I really should just put down some, medium mechs, maybe some of the heavier light mechs for newcomers to the game. Don't overtax them with multiple weapon systems and tons and tons of armor. And also heavier mechs are usually, slower, so they can't really get to move quite as fast as they might want to in their very first game. So that's what I learned. Then I got to my third game of Alpha Strike, and again this was a demo for 2 people who'd never played Alpha Strike before. I wanted to show them how Alpha Strike works on a hex map. And this time we once more had like a 2 versus 2 sort of setup. I took a lance of mechs and also a lance of hovercraft, while my buddy also took a lance of mechs, and our opponents also took 1 lance of mechs per player. And we played this nice game of Alpha Strike on hex map. This demo game went really well, I think, and the new players of Alpha Strike liked playing Alpha Strike on hexes, so that was really nice. What I personally learned in this game was using overheat, because I had picked a Stalker that's not quite as expensive and it has relatively poor damage values. It's got like 3, 3, and 2, but it does have a massive overheat of like 4. And for the first time I really learned that what it's there for, because the Stalker, it was slow and it didn't do much, but the one time it really needed to deliver was trying to kill a griffin that was on the objective, and I used all of its overheat and I demolished that mech off the table in one go. That's when the value of the overheat mechanic in the game really sort of clicked with me, because I'd never really paid too much attention to the overheat values in Alpha Strike before. But ever since that game, I've really tried to use the overheat value more when making tactical decisions about where I want to concentrate my fire. My next 3 games of BattleTech were with the same person. It was my cousin, who, he'd had some mechs before that I'd given him as a birthday present and stuff, but at Ropecon he got really into it and bought a bunch of clan stuff, and we wanted to play a campaign. And we picked the Death from Above Wargaming BattleTech campaign system, which is a little bit more streamlined and simplified version of, how the Chaos campaign works. Also, they use their own mission pack for the campaign, and that's what we picked because we didn't want to do too much bookkeeping. Just wanted to roll some dice and see how playing, a quick campaign would feel like. And I learned a bunch of stuff about BattleTech while doing it. The first thing I learned about BattleTech when starting this campaign started before our first game, and it's the fact that coming up with a setting for a campaign isn't very hard at all, which I thought it would be, but it's not. Basically, we wanted to play a Hell's Horses versus Ghost Bears campaign, my Hell's Horses versus my cousin's Ghost Bears, and then I started looking into their history, and I found this Operation Noyen that Hell's Horses started in 3147 when they attacked some Russelhag Dominion planets, trying to claim a couple of them. And, that felt like a very sort of appropriate setting for our campaign. So coming up with a setting was quite a bit easier than I thought. I also learned a couple of things during gameplay itself, like our games, and the first thing is, I'd used combat vehicles in BattleTech before, not too many, a couple of times, but this was really when I saw just how fragile they are, especially hovercraft. It really, really doesn't take a lot to stop a hovercraft, especially if you have like a very good elite pilot shooting in LBX-20 at a hovercraft where they score like 15 hits and you have to roll like motive hits for like 8 of them. So, try to pick your battles as a hovercraft pilot, I guess. My hovercraft were really pretty much slaughtered in the games I played. Very useful, and turrets are very useful because you can still keep firing, but, hovercrafts are fragile, even if they are sort of heavily armored like the Hell's horses below them. Something I also learned, like this is a part of the rules that I've known, but we ran into a couple of situations where we had to debate the rules of partial cover and line of sight. These are rules that I know, but this is sort of the game that sort of cemented for me how and why a certain line of sight things work. I'm going to make a short video on this a bit later because I think this is something that people get wrong a lot, especially when starting out, but it's really quite simple. And the magic keyword is intervening adjacent hex. This is like the most important part when it comes to BattleTech line of sight rules. Intervening adjacent hex, right? We'll talk about it later. And finally, I played 2 sort of quicker games of Alpha Strike on Hex Map at the very end of July, and we had the express purpose of trying out different initiative systems for the game. We tried 2 different ways of using the initiative deck, and the first idea was that every unit gets a card, and we just pick from a deck 1 card at a time, and that mech gets to move on its turn. I can't say I love this. It felt a bit too much like it was still a very lopsided, I guess. I purposely picked more units than my opponent because I wanted to try the limits of the system, but I didn't think it felt too good to have like 5 units move at the same time while your opponent hasn't moved a single one yet. It sort of felt a little bit naff, and I don't think we will be using this system again. And in my very last game of Alpha Strike in July, we tried a different system where we used the normal rules for initiative, and we used the Init app by Flex, who also makes Flex sheets for this. But we had like a card for every mech, but we had to draw them blind. So you follow the normal initiative rules, but you draw a card blind. So you can't really save your like most critical mechs for last. You had to very often move the mechs you didn't want to move quite yet. And I felt that this initiative system brought a kind of unpredictability to the initiative without being like too bad in terms of, your opponent doesn't get to move all of their stuff before you do. You might just not be able to move your mechs in the order that you want to. So you kind of have to be thinking ahead in a different way when compared to like normal initiative, I would say. So that was a pretty cool way of playing Alpha Strike. Works for BattleTech as well. We'll probably be playing using that system again somewhere down the line. So there you go, 13 games of BattleTech and Alpha Strike played in July. Of course, it's August now, end of August, and I haven't played a single game of BattleTech. So that sort of balances it out, I guess. But, I think it was still a very nice sort of exercise to really get into grips with some of the rules and stuff I hadn't touched before and sort of think about my philosophy on a couple of things, a couple of clarifications on how things work. There's actually more I could have learned from these games, but, I just wanted to make a quick video on the main stuff I sort of realized during all of these games. Maybe all of it is very, familiar to you. Maybe you're like, how did you not know this? Why didn't you do this before? But, I'm just trying to better myself here. And I do hope that even if you're a veteran gamer, maybe you can try to learn something new in every game you play, every time you engage with your hobby. Anyway, that's the video for this time. Thanks for listening. and see you next time.